I'm a police officer. A situation that stands out the most would have to be Halloween 2001. This particular experience nearly made me take a leave due to the weirdness, so don't say I didn't warn you. It starts off on a regular Halloween patrol. My usual partner was sick and somehow managed to attend a party, so I was stuck with a crotchety racist who I didn't really like. About an hour in, he says something like, "Hey, Spook, what are those guys doing?" After a brief and angry discourse on nomenclature, we stopped to see what looked like a bit of an impromptu costume orgy past a thicket on the side of the road. This was normal for Halloween, and was more often than not drunk, middle-aged partygoers. The two men were dressed as Mickey Mouse, and the woman was hard to see, but appeared to be dressed as a deer. Normally, when I see the old random hump, I let them have the privacy to finish and then chase them off or arrest them depending on the location. This time was disconcerting, though. They weren't holding the woman down, but from what I could see, she was unresponsive. So we strolled up and tapped on the tree behind them. They didn't stop canoodling, but what we saw made us jump back, and I'm unashamed to admit I threw up on the spot. This is the part where I say that what I saw was the single most awful thing I, and I'm assuming racist asshole as well, have ever seen. It wasn't a deer costume. It was a half-butchered doe with its intestines strewn about. They were taking turns fucking it, and all they were wearing was Mickey Mouse masks. That was really hard to talk about because the image is still really fresh in my brain after all these years. This was just so inhumanly awful that I can't describe it. I might tear up, and I'm not kidding. Anyway, we stare completely frozen for about a minute until racist asshole takes out his gun and starts yelling at them. These guys don't pay any attention to us and just keep humping away, covered from the waist down in blood and what appeared to be some solid matter. Finally, my brain kicks in and I tell racist asshole to lower his gun, and we both step forward and detain the two men. We call it in and take the two men back to the station. They don't say a damn word the whole way back, but one guy keeps chuckling. They tested positive for meth, big fucking surprise, and were both very incoherent even after they came down. I didn't look into it much, but they both apparently were run-of-the-mill laborers who had gone missing months prior. So, that's one of the most gruesome things I've ever seen. One of the most visually disturbing, anyway. So yeah. Happy Halloween.
I was 14 when this happened. For personal reasons, I'm not going to reveal my name. Last year, I was kidnapped. I was home alone, and my parents were at work in London. I got up that day, got dressed, and went downstairs. I was starting school at 9:30, so after watching some TV and eating my breakfast, I decided it was time to leave. I left my home around 9 a.m. and started the 10-minute walk to school. I went down the street and past the corner shop through the alleyway. I take this route almost every day without any problem. I was about halfway down the alleyway when a gloved hand quickly grabbed my mouth and another grabbed my wrist. I dropped my school bag and began kicking and screaming as I was dragged backwards. I was pinned to the ground by a black man, while another man who was white tied my wrist behind my back. After a while, I blacked out. I woke up in a chair, completely tied up. I began to protest, pleading with them. The white man, who was around 5'9" with shaggy blonde hair, pulled out a roll of very thick duct tape. He ripped off a few pieces. Then the black man stuffed a sweaty sock in my mouth. The tape literally covered my entire lower head. I began to struggle as they both sat in front of me discussing where I was going to be kept. It was decided that I would stay upstairs in bed. I was unfastened from the chair and carried upstairs and dumped on a bed where I was hogtied. I laid there all night, crying silently. The next day the white man returned and promised to remove my gag if I was quiet. As soon as the gag came off, I screamed. He then quickly clasped his hand over my mouth as he searched for another suitable gag. An old rag was stuffed into my mouth and secured with a rugby sock. The next day I was carried over the black man's shoulders. We went downstairs and then he threw me into a trunk of a car. I was driven back to my house and left on the doorstep. My parents discovered me, then called the police. The kidnappers were never found. The reason for the kidnapping was never known. The police suspected it was for human trafficking, but they both became nervous and returned to me in fear of jail. In the time that I was kidnapped, the police had been searching for me.
On the night of this incident, it had started to rain right before I went to bed. My bed was right under the window, so I left the Venetian blinds down and my window open a crack. Just enough to hear the rain, but not enough to actually let the water in. I've always loved the rain. Because I live in the desert, rain is a rare treat, so I look forward to lulling off to sleep listening to the soothing pitter-patter. Just as I was starting to nod off, is when I heard it. The crunching outside of my window. It sounded like the rocks outside shifting beneath the weight of something. Startled, I sat up in bed and peered through the cracks of the window's blinds. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see a man's figure, craning his head outside my window as if he were trying to find a crack in my blinds so he could see inside. Shocked at what I was looking at, I sat there frozen in fear, mere inches away from his face. For half a minute, my mind was racing, trying to decide what I should do. All the while, he was still bobbing and weaving his head, trying to look inside. And then I did what is probably the stupidest thing possible. I yanked on the pulley to lift the blinds open, and I asked him what he was doing. He jumped back in surprise, and that's when I was able to actually look at him. He looked like a young man in his early 20s, dressed in a stereotypical burglar's outfit. Black clothing with a black beanie. I repeated myself. "What are you doing?" That's when I saw his face twist into a sadistic-looking smile as he leaned closer to the window. I could tell that he wasn't scared of me because he didn't run or really do anything except give me that creepy-ass leering smile. He actually seemed excited to find a girl, and he moved even closer to the window. Trying not to show fear myself, I casually started yelling for my male roommate. "Hey, Eric!" All the while, he just stood there staring, as if he didn't believe I had a man living with me. After having to yell for him several times, Eric finally responded, half asleep. "What?" "There's a guy in my window." And get this, the sick fuck waited for Eric to saunter all the way into my bedroom, put his glasses on, stare at him for a good 10 seconds and say, "Bro, I'm gonna call the cops," before he finally decided to get lost. And then, still smiling, he simply picked up what appeared to be a black bowling bag and walked off into the darkness. We stared in silence as he just disappeared into the dark of the alley behind our house, occasionally turning his head to look back at us. I'm convinced you don't dress like a cat burglaring ninja with a black bag full of God knows what, without being up to something rapey. We then called the cops, and unfortunately, they never found him. A few days later, I was out walking my dog near my window when I saw something sticking out of the bush right underneath. Not knowing what it was, and without thinking, I reached into the bush and pulled it out. I gasped before dropping it and running back inside. It was a hammer.
When I was kidnapped, I was engaged to a very awesome, beautiful girl. She was 25, and I was 22. One night I was packing up so I could go see her the next day and spend the next 2 weeks with her. We planned on getting married in 2 months. Her name was Heather. That night, I knew I needed to fill the car up with gas, so I drove down to the corner market. At this point, I was living in El Paso, Texas. I went back to my apartment. I was the only one living in the complex at the time. Most people found it was too expensive, but it fit well to my budget. I felt safe there. I even left the door unlocked when I was home, but this night was going to change all that. I had turned out all the lights except for the kitchen light before I left, so it was a bit dark. I came in and walked into my living room. When I did, someone came from behind the front door, and I felt a gun being pressed to the back of my head. I quickly turned around, and someone else came from behind me and grabbed both my arms. I asked what they wanted, and the guy with the gun responded with, "Shut up, you're coming with us." At this point, the man who had a hold of me took me outside, where I told him that I didn't know what they were doing, but to let me go, and I wanted to see my fiancée the next day. Needless to say, this had no effect on the kidnappers. The one with the gun said that he could see that I wasn't going to cooperate, so he grabbed my legs and carried me to the trunk of the car, where they put me inside. They then took duct tape and taped my hands behind my back. They taped my ankles together as well, and they also put tape over my mouth. After they did this, the kidnappers took a burlap sack and placed it over my head. Next thing I knew, I was tied up in some chair, in some place. My cell phone was laying on a table that was near me, and I could see that it was Heather trying to call me. I then heard a loud pop, and I felt a terrible pain in my stomach. The kidnappers shot me 3 times in the stomach and left me for dead. They had taken me to Mexico, and they were trying to get ransom for me for some sort of drug deal. But because they couldn't get any, they decided that the only thing left to do was to shoot me since I could identify them. I was found by the police and was escorted back to the United States. My kidnappers were never caught, and the scar left by the gunshot is a constant reminder of this incident.
Not my freshman roommate, but my wife's. Just girlfriend at the time, but you could say she's leveled up a few times since then. The girl had no social life of her own outside of one friend who would corner you and wouldn't shut up. Having no social lives or dating lives of their own, they took it upon themselves to start stalking me online. Suddenly, I was getting tons of hits on sites I'd put together from their dorm network. Apparently they didn't realize I could track that. And they were showing up and signing guest books on old GeoCities sites I'd done in high school and other crap like that. One time, I forgot my laptop in their room. Roommate decided it would be hilarious to turn it on, go through my stuff, and then download a bunch of gay porn and set some of it as the background on my machine. Did I mention that this was within the space of the 10 minutes it took me to get to my car, realize I didn't have my computer, and walk back up to their room? She ended up downloading a vile cocktail of viruses along with all that gay porn and, well, I had to nuke the hard drive from orbit. Most roommates have the courtesy to knock on the door if it's late at night on a weekend, and they know their roomie's in there with their significant other. But not these two. They would unlock the door as quickly as possible, burst in, and turn on the lights with shit-eating grins on their faces like they were hoping to find us boinking. We never were, because we knew they were going to pull that shit. The roommate would sit on my wife's bed eating food and watching TV, but not on her own bed. Her roommate would go through my wife's stuff when she didn't think she'd be around. One day, my wife comes home to find that her hairbrush had been picked clean. Roommate's friend had decided to clean it for her, to be nice. We never found out what happened to the hair, but I pray that it just went into the trash and not into a hair doll.
I was 17 years old when I was kidnapped. I was walking through a park with my best friend David. It was getting dark and he said that he had to go home. I told him that I was going to spend a little bit more time walking around. I thought nothing would happen if I just spent 10 more minutes walking. It was a pretty isolated park, and not too many people were out this time of day. When I was walking out of the park, I heard a noise. It was some rustling in the bushes, and I just assumed that it was a rabbit or something. Since I had frequently seen rabbits in this park, I just kept walking, and I was suddenly grabbed from behind. A man's arms wrapped around me, and his strong hand was clasped over my mouth, muffling my screams. He dragged me into a dirty silver car and quickly shoved me in the back seat. He put me on my stomach and forcefully took off my sweater. While I fought and struggled, I felt him wrap duct tape around my wrists. He then yanked my hair back and whispered in my ear that if I kept screaming, he would kill me. He took off my jeans and wrapped tape around my ankles and even above my knees. I was still struggling. I even tried kicking him with my bound feet, but it didn't work. "Shut the fuck up," he yelled at me before stuffing a huge cloth into my mouth and placing several strips of duct tape over it. He then cut off my shirt, leaving me in only my bra and underwear. He started touching me, and I could feel his hands all over me. I was crying and trying to scream through the gag. He cupped my breasts, and then began to kiss my face and stomach. He stopped and said it was time to go home. He then kissed my forehead and pulled me out of the car. He hoisted me over his shoulder and carried me to the trunk of the car and threw me in. I remember getting to his house and him tying me to a bed. My wrists and ankles were tied to the bedpost with rope. When he was done tying me up, he took the cloth out of my mouth and then put duct tape back over it. He cut off my bra and underwear, leaving me completely naked, and I think you have a pretty good idea what happened next. I was held hostage for almost a year. He never dressed me. I spent the entire time in his basement, tied up. Sometimes he would tie me up really tight and have me sleep in his bed with him. He had a stripper pole in his basement, and he would invite his friends over and make me dance on the pole for them. He liked feeling me and groping me a lot. I was pretty much always gagged. Christmas came by. He put me under his tree and tied me with red and green rope with a big bow on top of my head. He said I was his Christmas present. I remember wanting to die. I tried to escape many times, but he always tied me up so well that it was useless. One day I remember being on the living room floor, with my hands tied tightly around my back. I was still fully naked, and I had a ball gag in my mouth. My kidnapper came over to me, and he was about to do his thing again, when several police officers and FBI broke down the door and told him to get away from me. Then he was arrested. I was taken to the hospital where my family met me. I found out that I was there for almost 10 months. I felt truly blessed to be alive. I was glad that I had not given up and was so happy to be back with my family.
I was living in a low-income housing apartment in Minnesota, and at the time, my mom and I simply couldn't afford to have an actual internet provider. This meant that I leached off of people in my building who had an unprotected wireless connection. Whenever their internet connections would go out, I would be forced to go down to McDonald's in order to use the free Wi-Fi there. This had become a pretty common thing for me. On one of these internet droughts, I was standing about in the lobby of my apartment, about to go to leave, when the guy who lived next door to me, an older guy named Joe, stopped me before I left. He tells me that he and another of my neighbors were going to McDonald's for coffee, and that he'd buy me one if I went along. I figured, sure, why not? I didn't really know much about Joe, since I mostly kept to myself. Let me explain Joe. He's hunchbacked, with a beer gut, and his ZZ Top-esque beard was full of food crumbs which I can only assume were from a McBiscuit. But he seemed like a nice enough guy, so I went along. After a ride in his rickety truck through the Minnesota winter, I was happy to reach McDonald's. Ah, free Wi-Fi at last. And if Joe held up to his word, a free McCoffee as well. I sit down and fire up the laptop to soak in all that free Wi-Fi, and soon after, Joe comes back with our McCoffees. As soon as he sits down, he starts asking me in a raspy voice, "So, boy, ever heard of God's DNA?" I look up from the Windows loading screen and ask him, what? I was totally baffled and thinking, great, stuck with another missionary. He goes on to inform me that God's DNA is the molecules that hold the universe together. Not to mention, it's what makes men genetically superior to women. I sure as shit didn't learn that in physics class, so I blew him off, and when I got the chance, quietly ducked into another booth to browse the internet in peace. He didn't seem to notice, because afterwards, a barrage of freaky, beardy lumberjack dudes would come in and out of McDonald's and talk to him for like 15 minutes at a time. I can only assume they were talking about God's DNA because I did my best to not pay any attention. But Joe and his gang of weirdos still gave me a really creeped out feeling. I could tell that they kept looking over to stare at me when they thought I wasn't looking. Having had enough weirdness for the night, I decided to duck out when he hobbled off to the bathroom. I assume to take an epic McShit. I took my chance, folded up the laptop, and headed out to brave the cold Minnesota winter on the way back home. I reckoned that having to put up with the elements was still preferable to being around a bunch of weird-looking lumberjack creeps. I was almost back to my apartment when I heard the truck slowly rolling up and crunching the snow. I looked over my shoulder and, of course, saw Joe in his truck. Next to him was another one of those fucking bearded bums from McDonald's. I waved to them but got no response. Whatever. But from that point on, every night after that, every time I went to McDonald's, either Joe or one of his weirdo lumberjack buddies would be there. I could practically feel them leering at me. They always appeared grungy and disheveled. Forced to go to McDonald's just to use the internet, I tried avoiding them as much as possible. It almost seemed as if they knew ahead of time that I was going to be there. Considering they all had a relationship with Joe, I think it's quite likely that they actually did. Eventually, someone broke into Joe's apartment and stole his bicycle, prompting him to move elsewhere. I learned a couple other things about Joe after he left the apartment, such as that he traded most of his food stamps every month for drugs, and that he regularly told women in our apartment that he wanted to leave his body and spirit and ravish them in their sleep, whatever that meant. After this point, I saw the McDonald's stalkers only sparingly. and then never again.
Me and my mother were volunteering to set up for a dance at a country club. We've already volunteered there a few times, but this time we met other volunteers there. There was a woman and her son kept asking me questions about how to set up the tables and where they kept the food that we were supposed to put out. So basically all the questions the guy who owned the place had already answered. I figured that he just needed a friend. I wasn't creeped out until he started staring at me. I would look at him, and then he would look away. But right when I turned back to what I was doing, out of the corner of my eye, I could see him staring at me again. I was kind of freaked out. So after we were done volunteering, my mom said that we could leave. I went to go grab my coat and he followed me. He asked me if I was coming to the dance that night. I told him no. Then he gave me this look like he was furious about what I had just told him. Then he walked away. So me and my mom left and I forgot all about this guy. 2 weeks later, I get this phone call. I answered it and it's the guy that I met at the country club. He asked me if I'll be busy that day. I tell him, sorry, I am. Then he yells at me and then hangs up. I never gave him my number and I wasn't sure how he got it. He then called later that night and he told me that he was sorry for calling and yelling at me.
I work inside of a pizzeria in a 24-hour gas station. It's actually very small, so we share a freezer, refrigerator, and back room with the gas station cashiers. The pizza place is a new addition to the gas station. So far, my boss has only hired 3 college-age girls, including myself, to work here. So, I'm going to begin this story from the time I was hired and work my way up to the present day. The first few days of my employment at the gas station were very nice. The gas station cashier who I usually worked with would offer to buy me food and drinks from the soda fountain, and I often took them home. He was an older guy, probably in his mid-40s, with a very thick accent and loose grasp on English. He was also very tall compared to us girls, probably about 1.5 feet difference, maybe 6'5". Another cashier told me he was Persian. That's pretty neat, I thought. Until things started getting weird. One Saturday night, while him and I were alone, he asked me to come to his house party. I politely declined. He clearly was upset, but didn't say much until the next day. I want to get to know you, he would say throughout the day. He wrote down his phone number and awkwardly stuffed it into my backpack as I was leaving that night. I smiled politely and told him that I was very busy, and I didn't stick around to talk. Things escalated from there. Every few days he would ask me to go out for coffee, or that he would buy me dinner, and every time I would decline, saying that I was busy. He was getting more and more frustrated every time I would say no, but to be honest, he scared me. I wasn't going to outright tell him that, no, I'm not interested and won't ever be, for some small fear in the back of my mind that he might hurt me. This went on for about a month, until the offers almost stopped completely. By this point, I was avoiding absolutely all contact with him, and I'm sure he picked up on it. When he and I were in the same room, I was completely tense and refused to say anything. I even started consistently locking the door to the pizzeria for fear he would come in. He tried to wander in once or twice, but of course couldn't. That made him angry. I still wouldn't let him in and handed him whatever he needed over the counter. I drive a motorcycle, so there's no getting in and locking the doors here when I leave at 12 a.m. And he knew that. One night, about 2 months ago, I was leaving for the night. He had already left, but I was still tense. I felt a little crazy at first for doing this, but ever since I started reading Let's Not Meet about 2 years ago, I always carry a knife on me. no exceptions. So that night, like most nights, I had my knife open in my pocket with my hand on it. I looked around. The parking lot was rather empty, and unfortunately, cameraless, and I saw his car parked a few spaces away. I wasn't sure it was even his, so I wasn't worried and kinda laughed at myself for being so worked up. I started my bike to give it time to warm up. At that moment, the door to his car opens and I'm in 100% fear mode. I frantically and awkwardly shove on my helmet. "Hey," he calls. "Hey!" I don't answer. I just start rolling my motorcycle out of the parking spot. He strolls out from the shadows and stands a foot or so in front of me. "Give me a kiss," he says in a really unsettling tone. He also puts his hand on my handlebar. Big no-no, and I reach for my pocket. He takes a slightly startled step back, probably thinking that I have pepper spray or something. And the second he steps back, my fight or flight kicks in and I tear out of the parking lot. "Where are you going?" he shouted, really angry. I didn't say anything. I rationalized that he didn't actually touch me, so who would care? My bosses were all foreign as well. Wouldn't they stick up for him? After that, he stopped talking to me completely. There were no more awkward advances, and I finally felt like I could relax. Until, of course, when my coworker was alone with him a few days ago. He had always called her the fat girl and the ugly one, but I didn't say anything about that either. When she went into the refrigerator to get some milk from the shelf, he was in there. While her back was turned, he grabbed her from behind, forcibly groped her, and kissed her, and she was too scared to fight back. I don't know much else about the event. She doesn't want to talk about it either. But I know that if I had said something, that probably wouldn't have happened to her. He was immediately fired and is on his way back to Iran in the next week. Good.
He asked me if I'm busy the next day, and I told him that I will be. To this, he doesn't say anything. He just hangs up. After that, he basically called me every day asking me if I was busy. I got sick of him calling, and when he would call, I would have a family member answer and say that I wasn't home. Then, one night, I was up in the kitchen getting something to drink. I hear a knock on the slider patio door, and I see him standing there with a flashlight. I screamed and ran into my parents' room. My dad gets up and doesn't see anybody outside our door, and the door was locked, so we know he didn't get inside. I slept in their room that night. A few months pass, and he calls my house again and asks why I didn't let him in. I hang up on him and block his number. He gets another phone and calls my house. He asks why his girlfriend, referring to me, blocked his number. I told him that I wasn't his girlfriend and that he needs to leave me alone or I was going to call the cops. A few years go by, and I didn't hear anything from him. At this point, I'm a senior in high school. Then out of nowhere, he shows up on my doorstep asking me if I remember him. I tell him that I have a boyfriend and he needs to go away. He waited outside my school in the parking lot after that, and he asked me if I need a ride. I tell him no. I got a ride home from one of my friends that day. He follows us for a bit, but eventually gives up after a while. A few days later, my friend's tires were slashed. Not long after that, I was home alone one night, sleeping in my room. Just before I fell asleep, he breaks in my window and comes inside. I scream at the top of my lungs, but my parents are on a cruise, and I'm the only one home. I was positive that I was going to die. I finally stopped screaming and began to cry. He just made it worse by trying to hug me and comfort me, and then I started screaming again. He says he's going to take me somewhere and that we were going to run away together. And while he was saying this, the cops show up. He tried to run, but he was eventually caught. So now it's years later, and I'm married. I found out the neighbor across the street heard me scream and called the cops when she saw that my window was broken. I also found out that the guy who owned the country club gave him my address because he said that we left stuff there and he was going to bring it to our house. So I won't be volunteering anywhere else anytime soon.
When I was about 4 or 5, I went grocery shopping with my grandmother. I noticed she kept looking behind her and would inexplicably grab my hand and cart me along quickly for what seemed to be no reason. I didn't question it, though. I was happy to be getting out of there sooner, frankly. Around this time, my uncle, who lived with us, had recently headed out to fight in Desert Storm. My grandma was behind a display and talking about him, and I wandered off to play near a basket of toys or something, and I was right across from her. Being young and not understanding, I said something along the lines of, "Where's Uncle Mike? I miss Uncle Mike." An older guy with crazy dark brown hair quickly made his way over and bent down to my level. "Are you alone? You know, I have an Uncle Mike too. Let's go find him." He grabbed my arm and was about to pick me up. My grandma, thank God, was only 2 feet away, but was hidden by the display. She jumped when she heard him speak and immediately scooped me up and away from him.
I didn't know what had me fooling around with illegal stuff like the deep web, but I heard it was a place where you could find stuff that the normal internet didn't have. And I asked my tech-savvy friend how I could access the deep web. He wrote down some instructions, and after a while, I decided it was time to go home. When I got home, I looked at the card that he wrote the instructions on. It said I needed a web browser called Tor. Needless to say, I got the search engine and read on. Next, I needed to find a page called Hidden Wiki. After searching for a while, I finally found it. In the Hidden Wiki, links are given without name or description. The only way to find out what's inside is to click on it. After numerous sites I found with child porn, drugs, or hitman for hire, I came across a link that I have yet to explore. I clicked on it to see a video, and I pressed play. I saw nothing but a wall. I stared at it for a few minutes and was just about to exit when I saw something emerging through the wall. I waited and watched longer, and I discovered that it was a man with a mask. "Hey there," he said. At this point, I thought this was a prank video, so I just kept watching. After a while of just staring at the screen, he spoke again. "Aren't you going to speak?" he asked. I proceeded to type on the keyboard. "No, not on the keyboard. Speak," he said. At this point, I was a bit frightened. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm your friend," he proceeded to say. At this point, I'm scared, and my face filled with terror. I begin showing my fright. "Come on, friend. Don't give me that scared face," he said. This is when I got extremely frightened. "Just 1 second, friend. I'll get your address so we can talk in real life." Then he proceeded to type on his computer. Frantically, I tried to close the window down and get out of the video. "That won't work," he said. Before he had time to track my address, I got a screwdriver and removed the back and battery from my laptop. It's been some time since that happened, and he hasn't come to see me. I don't think he had enough time to track my address. Or did he?
Just to give you some background information, I'm a 29-year-old female, and this happened to me around 4 years ago. My family lived on a farm in rural outback Western Australia, in a modest-looking wooden farmhouse. My son and I lived here alone most of the time, while my husband worked on rotation up north on the mines. We had no neighbors, no mobile phone reception, and honestly, very little connection with the outside world save for the television. There was only one window in the house, situated above my bed in the bedroom. It was a small, old, wooden-framed window with no curtains. However, the window was completely jammed, and as much as I might try to close it, there was always around 2 inches of opening near the bottom of the window frame. My husband and I spent a while trying to oil the hinges and loosen it up the day before he left to go to work again, but we gave up as it wasn't a huge issue at the time. Fast forward to a couple nights later. I'm standing in front of the television doing the ironing and watching Sex and the City reruns while my son is asleep in my bed. As I walk up the hallway to enter the laundry to grab another load of washing, I pass my bedroom and pop my head in to check on my son. My heart stops. The window frame above my bed is shuffling from side to side. My eyes scan down, and what I see next will never leave my mind. There were 2 hands squeezed through the gap of my window, trying to lift up the jimmied frame. I screamed the house down, grabbed my son, the phone, and locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. I'd hate to think what would have happened if I hadn't been walking past my bedroom at that exact moment.
It started off as a normal day. I worked for a company that took house calls on people who had problems with their computers. My job mainly was dealing with people who, I swear, didn't know the simplest thing about computers. Regardless, it was my job to inspect and fix the issue. That night, I had a huge list of people waiting to get their computers repaired. The next on the list was a business that couldn't bring their computers online. I was requested by the owner to come check it out as soon as possible. I got my car and headed to this place. Since it was a business, I figured that there may be something wrong with a network cable, or someone may have installed a Trojan horse by accident. I finished the drive there and entered the building. When I reached the building, the owner directed me to a computer. He said that it wouldn't get online, and then he continued to rant about how Microsoft Windows is horrible. Being a computer tech, I've heard all of this before. I pulled out my laptop to see what the problem was. I tried accessing Google on the computer. It said that the URL was invalid, and since I know Google is a real website, there must be something wrong with the computer's connection. I checked the connection settings and I facepalmed at the fact that the computer was not connected to any Wi-Fi. All the networks were locked, so I asked the man for the passcode. He was taking a long time, so I decided to toy around with my laptop for a bit. All of a sudden, a network appeared with no security. Me, stricken with agony and boredom, I decided to log on to this network. I started going on the web, looking at articles and files, when my computer began to freeze. I found this strange. My laptop has never froze up before. As time progressed, it froze more and more frequently, with longer durations each time. Eventually, the browser crashed. As I was about to reboot my computer, a new browser started up, with a chat box in the middle. A random user logged on and began typing, "This is your last warning. Leave this network now." At the time, I thought this was a program built into this network to keep hackers away. So I paid no attention, but it began typing again. This is your final warning. Leave now. At this point, I'm quite impressed with the program. After all, it was well made. I could hardly tell that it was a program. Leave now, or else. I still didn't know why I did this, but I decided to taunt it. I replied, "Or what?" The user typed, "I will make your life hell." I laughed it off. Now this program had my respect. It was very entertaining. "This is good security," I wrote in the box. The user just responded with, "I warned you." Then this unknown user proceeded to write my name. This is when I began to get scared. I didn't tell him my name. Then I asked, "How do you know my name?" Instead of answering my question, he proceeded to name my personal information. My address, my credit card numbers, my phone number, social media accounts, and all the information was accurate. Shocked out of my mind, I sat in complete silence. Eventually, the user typed again, "Since you refuse to leave, you'll see hell." The chat box disappeared. At this point, I was rapidly pushing the disconnect button, and it's not responding. The option to exit the browser and turn off my computer were also disabled. As I looked on the screen, I am filled with utter terror. I saw things humans should never see. Murder, demonic sacrifice, rape, infants being killed, and more. At the end of the video, I vomited. I couldn't take any more of this. The chat box reappears and says, "Leave while you still can." I quickly turn off my computer and disconnect from the network. I didn't tell the owner about this, as it would just make things worse. The owner came back and we got connected to a wireless network. I rushed out of there as soon as possible. I'm lucky that I didn't hear anything of this since.
I lived in a house with 4 other people one year. The house was old and pretty dilapidated, but with so many people, it was really cheap. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and I slept in the living room. The girl who slept in the master bedroom had 2 cats and her own bathroom. First off, she refused to keep the cats' litter box in the bathroom because it wouldn't fit, which is bullshit, by the way, and instead insisted on keeping it in the other bathroom where the other 4 of us had to shower. She never scooped the litter box, and the cats got worms because it got so unsanitary. It also smelled like you would not believe. Every time we asked her to clean it, she got really passive-aggressive until one of us broke down and ended up cleaning it instead. She also refused to get her cats fixed, which was a violation of our lease agreement, because she was too poor. She owned the dryer. It broke. She couldn't get it fixed because she was too poor. She owned the refrigerator. It broke. She couldn't get it fixed because she was too poor. The food inside rotted, and combined with nobody doing their dishes, we got roaches. She wasn't going to chip in for an exterminator because she was too poor. But hey, she was never too poor to go outlet shopping for new clothing. Then, she gets a boyfriend who was well off. She suddenly gets a new car, and she goes on a vacation to Punta Cana. The fridge and dryer were still broken, and it remained just as disgusting inside. At this point, me and another friend decide to get the fuck out, and we get our own place. We had enough. She was just a total bitch. She called me spoiled because I ate out a lot, and accused me of purposefully driving our utility bills up because I was rich. Okay. After me and my friend moved out, this girl eventually left as well, However, she just sort of ran out on the people who were still living there and didn't sign the utilities over to anyone else's name. Their electricity and water got shut off because of it. At least I'd gotten out by then. This girl ended up marrying this guy, and they're both living near me now. The friend I moved out with actually ended up befriending this girl again, claiming she's changed. I'll take her word for it.
I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had a room, but I liked sleeping in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor. I remember it was one night in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open in her room that was directly behind her bed, above the headboard. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I remember seeing our house cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Her door was open, and you could partially see into my room. It was strange because our house cat was usually in the bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom to wake her up. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back at the doorway, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do this so quickly, but my mother proceeded to literally pick me up and throw me out of the window that was behind her bed. Again, we were on the first floor, so it was maybe about a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed me, and we ran away, screaming for help. Eventually somebody called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry. Only the front door was left unlocked, which led them to believe that the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was, my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night. About a week later, she was cleaning in the kitchen and opened up the water heater closet and found a notebook inside with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep.
This happened a few years ago, when I was in middle school. We were at my friend Bill's house, celebrating the end of our sports season. We were playing in the front yard, and our parents were inside, chatting away. We were close to the street, and all 7 of us weren't planning on moving anytime soon. Down the street, a large, white, unmarked van is driving, and it stops right next to us. A man gets out and, you guessed it, offers us candy. By this point, we were scared to our guts and, with many stumbles, try and run back inside the house. 2 guys tripped on the way back, but we all made it in, unscathed. We hurriedly told our parents, who stood outside the rest of the time, and we switched to being inside the house. Now here's where it gets weird. He comes back. He even gets out of the car again. He explains that he was offering candy because his wife and daughter were out of town. We never saw him again.
A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked on other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided that we were going to give the southern portion of the Virginia's Trail a shot. It was about 166 miles long and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forests. This was definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. It was early October, and the changing of the leaves and colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike. However, our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you were supposed to camp at the designated shelters. We really didn't want to be around other people and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night. We decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spot off the trail. After a little searching around, we found a spot just a little ways off from the trail. It was in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect, so we set up camp, cooked some food, talked a while, and snuggled up and then went to sleep for the night. It was somewhere around 2 a.m. I was awakened by my girlfriend shaking me and telling me to get up. She said, "Someone is walking around outside our tent." Then she informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent, running a knife along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry my 1911 and a judge with me. You never know who exactly you might run into on such a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack, and we sat silently listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard it. Snap, crunch, snap. Someone or something was walking through the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. The fire that we built earlier had gone out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated only by the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked things out. I didn't flick on the flashlight right away, as to not give away that I was outside of the tent and have it become a shining beacon of my location. Instead, I waited to hear some more noises. After a few minutes, I heard it. Snap, crunch, crack. I then turned on my flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area, where I thought I saw the figure. Then from my right, I heard what sounded like somebody running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way. Then from the original spot, who or whatever took off into the woods. There was no way that I was giving chase, so I just returned to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened and ended up sitting guard outside the tent in the darkness until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't my girlfriend's. This freaked me out, and it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one person, was walking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak out my girl any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep, and we still had 2 days of hiking left. That day, we walked a little faster than normal and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp again, I found a small spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up from behind us. The whole day up to this point, I had the feeling that we were being followed, as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food. Then we retreated into the tent. I gave my girl the 1911 and I kept the judge right next to me, and I assured her if I got any sleep at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep, and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I had been awake for a few hours just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess exhaustion caught up with me, and I drifted off. I awoke some time later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the dying fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them, something along the lines of, "We are armed! Get the fuck out of here!" They dropped what they were doing and then bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction of whoever had fled. There was a creek nearby, and I walked to the edge. I could see that there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek, I could see a light. It looked like a lantern by the way it flickered, and then I saw 3 more lights emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could, and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent behind along with a few other things, and headed back onto the trail in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people talking off in the woods, and I also heard branches snapping for quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure no one was coming up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were a long ways from anywhere, and quite literally on our own. Since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time that we were out here, I really felt that we were in serious danger. We'd been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods from behind us. As we rounded the corner, I turned around and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was starting to rise, and there was barely any light. I couldn't make out any of their features. I just saw the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them, and then asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently watching us. We picked up pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me that they were still following us. We eventually reached the end of the trail, and we got to where my girlfriend's car was parked. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone just messing with us, or maybe it was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I will never know, because I'm not returning to find out.
This happened to me just a few weeks ago. My parents had gone out of town and left me at home. And I was fine for the first few days, playing games, watching TV, regular shit. One day, I'm sitting in my room around 7 at night when I hear someone knocking at my door. Normally, my grandmother, who lives just down the road, will come over and check up on me and say goodnight and stuff, so I'm thinking it's her, and I go to let her in. I open my main door and see not my grandmother, but a man. He looked to be in his mid-30s and was kind of overweight. He held a clipboard and just stared at me until I said something to him. Hello? Hi, I'm from the furnace company, and I'm here to check your furnace. As he said this, he tried forcing me away to let him in. I kept my ground and held him back. My parents aren't here right now. Can you come back later? His eyes lit up when he found out I was home alone. Just let me check, okay? I gotta make sure it's all fired up. That's when I checked the van he had. It was an unmarked green van. Normally, all companies in my town have a logo, and I mean all. I'm not letting you in. My yell somewhat startled him as he stepped back, and I was able to get in and lock the outer door, keeping him out. I grabbed my cell phone and called my grandmother to tell her what happened. As I told her, the guy ran back to the van and sped off. I'm horrified to think of what could have happened had I not scared him away.
It all started in high school. A few weeks in, I had a few friends and was keen on making more. So I tried to talk to everyone that I could. I was still somewhat new to the school, and one day I got lost. So I met the guy who would later become my stalker, and he showed me around. We made conversation, and at first I thought he would be nice to have as a friend. A week passed, and I had a few friends at this point, and I wanted to hang out with them as much as I could. I felt a little bad because my newest friend was a bit lonelier, so I invited him to come hang out with us. He didn't talk much at first, but then he started talking more and more, mostly to me, asking advice on life, and I was happy to help, until he started asking me to pat his head like a dog and make him a leash. It was a bit weird, you might say, and I just passed it off as a joke, and I humored him. Something that I should not have done, as he started calling me master or mistress. I asked him not to do that, and I told him that I wasn't comfortable with his behavior, but it was apparently too late to fix things. It happened day after day. He started skipping his classes to walk into and get kicked out of mine. He followed me all day, and if I had to use the restroom, guess who would follow me inside? I asked him to stop many times, but he wouldn't, so I got the school involved. Well, I tried, but they had no proof of stalking. I found that kind of strange because many teachers have kicked him out of my classes, but nevertheless, nothing happened. I asked one of my guy friends to help me out with some homework that night. My stalker was listening in from the hallway and didn't like who I asked for help. This occurrence happened numerous times before I just snapped at him. He fought every single male that I would talk to. Some would find this flattering, but I found it annoying. I tried to tell him not to worry, that we were just friends, but his exact words were, "They don't deserve you. They are worthless compared to my master." I tried to get him to stop. I yelled at him, and I do feel bad because it was quite harsh, but it was the only way that I could get it through his thick head. I was finally free from that cycle. He'd finally stopped following me, until one day, I found this letter in my locker. In the letter, my stalker gave his disgust for males, and how he hated himself, and that he must be evil, for his master treats him this way, and that he must be punished, and that I must be taught not to shun pets. It was a few pages long, and it was very scary. In fact, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever read, especially when I got done reading the letter and looked up and saw him staring at me from down the hall. He walked up to me and opened his phone and started showing me pictures. It was of this cartoon character who had a similar appearance to me. He then gave me a leash for him and asked me to walk him around. At that point, I ran away to the office, letter in hand. The principal, after 5 visits, finally had the fucking proof he needed and agreed to step in. The cops got involved, and soon after, a restraining order was put in place. He wasn't allowed to be within 50 feet of me. About a month later, I was in my bedroom doing some homework when I heard a scratch at the window. I looked over, and to my horror, he was standing just outside my bedroom window. He had a collar on his neck, and a leash was dangling down from it, and he was intensely glaring at me. His face then crooked into a disgusting grin. He then licked the surface of the window and ran off. Thankfully, I moved out of that town a month later, and I still have nightmares about this incident.
When my husband and I first moved out on our own, we had this neighbor that we would sometimes see outside and would talk to. We would even go to the local pool hall and play a few games of pool with him. One day, we're hanging out at his house and we're sitting outside. The cutest little black kitten walks up the yard. My husband and I are animal lovers, so I'm all about this kitten. My husband and the neighbor walk around the side of the house and are gone maybe a minute or two, and my husband returns. The look on his face was a mixture of horror and fury. He looks at me and says, "He killed that cat." I get up and walk around there, and my husband is holding this kitten. My neighbor had hit him in the head with a rock, but at this point, the kitten is breathing. Apparently, it had knocked him out. Long story short, we took the kitten to the vet and he had to have an eye removed. We've now had the kitten, which we named Midnight, for about 10 years. He's good now and one hell of a mouse killer. We found out a few years later that this neighbor had been out of town for work and was rooming with a coworker. He later went on to stab his roommate to death and returned back to his home here. It's scary to believe that someone like that lived right beside us and had been in our home and we'd been in his. Obviously, after the kitten thing, we stopped talking to him and let him know what we thought about it and what a piece of shit he was.
This is going to be a little different, because I'm usually the type of person who's being written about in these stories. I've liked this girl for the past 7 years, and I still find myself drooling over her pictures. I just can't seem to get over the fact that she doesn't like me. She's never been nice to me, but I still like her. Everything she says just makes me laugh, and I love being around her. But she has never liked me back, and kept telling me that we would never, ever end up together. This didn't break my heart or anything, because in my mind I knew that we were meant to be, and that we would indeed end up together someday. That thought is long gone now. Well, not really. But I still can't help but liking her. I still look through her Facebook page every now and then, and I still look for her face in every single car that drives by me. I used to stalk her family profiles just to see if there were any pictures of her, because you can imagine that she blocked me after I sent countless messages to her. But she lives kind of far away now, so I plan on moving closer to her. I know I sound like a creep, but that's because somebody like you probably wouldn't understand. I still manage to view her Facebook page through another account that I've set up. Whenever there is another guy who's liking a picture of her, posting a picture of her, or adding her as a friend, I immediately assume something is going on between them. So I just stalk them too. I look through all their pictures and keep myself updated on every time something happens to their profile. I know about all of her friends. I know everything. I fight back the urge almost every day to try to write her again. I just keep thinking about her all the time. I know everything about her. I know which friends post pictures of her. I know almost everything.
When I was in college, I rented a studio apartment in San Francisco. It was actually pretty decent, but instead of facing the street, my windows looked out onto a light well that housed garbage dumpsters and a trash chute. Because of this, my fire escape wasn't a balcony with a drop-down ladder, but rather a permanent metal staircase that led to a door at the bottom of the light well that emptied out onto an alley at the back of the building. The window to the fire escape was right next to my futon. On the floor, of course. Because, college. One night, when my boyfriend at the time was visiting from out of town, we had some drinks and smokes and fell asleep with the window open. During the night, I woke up from the cold, and as I turned to close the window, I was confronted by a blank, leering face. In my sleepy stupor, I blurted out, "What the fuck?" and he promptly scurried away. I slammed the window shut, closed the curtains, and woke up my boyfriend, trying to convince him of what I saw. He just assumed it was a bad dream, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I found a broom on the fire escape that wasn't there before, as proof that I hadn't imagined the encounter. I'm guessing a crackhead found the alley door ajar, grabbed the broom from a garbage pile, and decided to go peeping. At this point, I should explain that my apartment building was in downtown San Francisco, very close to the Tenderloin, so the next instance is probably not related, well, aside from probably being another crackhead. But at the time, my brain reacted as if it were. A few months later, I'm alone in my apartment cooking myself dinner when I come out of my kitchenette to see a crazy-looking dude on my fire escape. Again. This time, without thinking, I jolt toward the window, swearing like a schizophrenic pirate and flailing my limbs so much that my hand shatters the window, and he frantically runs down the fire escape and out the door to the alley. After he ran, I looked down and noticed lots of bright red spots on the floor and realized that the window had sliced my wrist open. I bandaged myself up, called my parents in San Jose, and sat myself in a chair with a chef's knife facing the window until my mom drove up and kept me company until morning.
This was about 4 years ago, when I was pregnant with my third daughter. My husband, kids, and I just moved to the big city. I've always been a quiet, stick-to-myself type of person, and moving to such a huge place really stressed me out. It took me months before I finally ventured out on my own, because I was terrified of driving in such a foreign place. Plus, I was also scared of the area that we moved to. 3 murders happened the same day we moved there. So I was worried about carjackings, shootings, rapes, and every other thing that comes with the big city. I rarely went out of the house, and I made my husband believe that I developed OCD from how many times I checked the door and window locks. Yeah, I was pretty on edge. Fast forward a few months and we moved to a new neighborhood. Not the best, but certainly a few steps up from where we were. I slowly started getting out of the house more and more, and I would even stay out when it was getting dark. I resumed my daily life, trying not to worry about getting carjacked or shot in broad daylight, and eventually I found a job at a funeral home. Working at the funeral home was great, with only occasional nope moments mixed in here and there. But the hours were long and inconsistent. Some nights I would get home around 5 p.m., and other nights I wouldn't get home until 2 a.m. It was one of those nights where I had to work late. I got off around 1:30 a.m. I got a text from my husband telling me to pick up some milk on my way home from work. I stopped at the closest Walmart and went in for some milk. However, being a female, I decided I needed about 50 other items while I went about my shopping. While strolling down the dairy aisle, I accidentally bumped into a man. His appearance kind of unnerved me. He was tall, with long, dirty hair covered in dirt and grime. His clothes were threadbare, and his pants would barely stay up on his thin frame. Now keep in mind, I wasn't used to seeing homeless people, but I assumed that he was. I apologized and went about my way. Several aisles over, I passed him again. He smiles at me, but in a creepy sort of way. Whatever. I just shrugged it off and kept shopping. About 10 minutes passed, and I was walking down the cosmetics aisle. I stopped to grab a few things, and then I turned around. The same guy was standing about 4 feet away from me. He doesn't look at me directly, but I can feel him staring out of the corner of his eye. That was my cue to get the fuck out of there. I turned my cart and practically ran to the checkout counter. As I'm unloading my shopping cart, he comes to the same register, and then he kept throwing things over the little divider that I put behind my stuff. I moved his things back, and then he put his hands on mine and asked me to stop. This pissed me off, and so I asked him what his deal was. Then he said, "Can you pay for my stuff?"
I realized that he had been watching me shopping, and since I was dressed nicely, he probably assumed that I had a lot of money. I politely told him no, and then waited for the cashier to ring up the rest of my items. 2 more people came to that same register, and he began asking them if they could pay for his stuff as well. "The nice girl in front of me already said that she'll pay for half of it," he tells them. At this point, I'm already paying for my stuff, so I turned to him and firmly said, "No." He and the other customers glared at me, and then he begins cursing and yelling at me. "This fucking bitch lied to me. She lied to me. She said she would help me." I tell him to fuck off, and that I'm too tired to deal with his shit, and that he should get a job and pay for his own stuff, which happened to be condoms, paper towels, cleaners, etc. And by the way, I might have said yes if it was just some food. I turn to leave, and then he grabs my arm and growls at me. "You're not going anywhere until you pay for this. I'll call the cops on you." I slap his hand off of me and tell him to go fuck himself. And then I stormed off towards the exit. I quickly get to my car, throw my stuff in the back seat, and shove the cart in the opposite direction. I jump in and start the car. When I was backing up, I noticed a beaten-up Camaro turned its lights on behind me. I hauled ass out of that parking lot, and so does the Camaro. I started driving towards home, but I had a gut feeling that I should take a different route. I wasn't sure this car was actually following me at this point. After all, it is a big city, and there's usually lots of cars heading the same direction as you are, but as I kept checking my rearview mirror, I had a bad feeling every time I saw that car. My suspicions were confirmed when I drove through my work's cemetery, and so did they. I called my husband and told him, "I think someone is following me." He advised me to get home ASAP, and that he would call the cops. I sped towards the house, making unnecessary turns, all with this creep right behind me. I can now hear him screaming at me. He begins hanging his head out of his window, waving his arm and telling me to pull over. He sped up parallel with me and tried to cut me off, but I slammed on the brakes and moved around him. He continues trying to get behind me, screaming and yelling obscenities. And then he started throwing stuff at my car. At this point, I'm sobbing. I'm a nervous wreck, scared to death that I'm going to get into an accident, and this creep is going to do God knows what with me. I'm almost home now, coming close to my turn, when I realized something that made my stomach drop. I live in a gated community. Now this might not sound too bad, except for the fact that you have to wait for the gate to open. I have to sit there for up to 30 seconds and wait for the automatic gate to open wide enough for me to drive through, and it will continue to stay open for a couple of minutes. I call my husband again and begin screaming for him to get out here now. I turn into the entrance and the gate is already open. I speed through, worried that it might close before I can get to it, and luckily for me, it didn't. However, the creepy guy is still on my ass. I don't really know what to do, so I lay down the horn and pray that my husband is on his way to the gate, and park the car. The guy slows down and turns off his headlights. He parks about 20 feet behind me. I hear his car door open. In the dark, I see him walking towards my car, holding something in his hand that looked like maybe a crowbar or a pipe of some sort. One of our neighbor's patio lights came on, and I see my husband running towards us, holding his shotgun. He lets off one round in the guy's direction. He screams for him to get the fuck out of here, and then shoots again. The guy ran back to his car, and then he quickly puts it in reverse. As he backed up, he hit one of the neighbor's cars before speeding out of there. I never saw him again, but for the next 6 months, I'd occasionally see a beat-up old Camaro hanging out at the end of my street. Since then, we've moved again. My husband gave me a 9mm handgun to keep in the car, just in case. Creepy homeless guy? Let's never meet again.
This morning, at around 10 a.m., I got on the bus to cash my first paycheck. Unfortunately, I got on the wrong bus. This bus took me all the way to the middle of nowhere. It smelled strongly of tobacco, which made me gag. I was really nervous, so I started talking to this woman next to me, asking if she knew where this bus was going and if I could get onto the mall hopper. the bus I take to get to work. She seemed very friendly, a little weird, but we started talking and she said she needed the same bus I did to pick up her boyfriend. We got off the bus together and she introduced herself as Moon. I noticed that it was her that smelled strongly like tobacco. As we were walking toward the next bus, she spied a spent cigarette on the sidewalk and knelt down and picked it up, tucking it behind her ear. It was a half hour till the next bus when she ducks into the Hannafords and comes out with some slices of ham in a plastic baggie. She pulls some out and offers it to me. I declined as politely as I could, wondering, how can I leave her without coming across as a douchebag? The bus pulls up after a bit, and we both get on. I sit a little away from her, but I can still see her. A minute into the ride, she starts pulling cigarettes from all of these pockets and eating them. She continues talking to me as if we were best buddies, and I'm beginning to feel ill. When we passed by the mall, she rang the bell and got off saying she wanted to do some shopping. So I guess she forgot about her boyfriend's story. Is this weird, or should I move back to the small town where I belong? Either way, I'm now hesitant to just jump on any bus I see. Don't think I'll be doing that again.